10 massive class changes from Classic to TBC. Okay.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. Yep, more TBC stuff today. So assuming, as many of us are, including myself, that we do end up releasing on the final patch of TBC, that being patch 2.4.3, just as we have released on the final patch of Classic being 1.12, there will be many different class changes that will have come into the game which will make things different, shall we say. Well, I say different, but it's pretty much always just straight up better power creep or pure convenience spells being introduced to the game, as well as a few interesting changes that I noted when going over the patch history of TBC. So I tried to take changes from each patch right from the start to the end of the expansion. Obviously some patches are far more driven towards big class changes, especially later on into TBC when issues and balance with current design have become more and more apparent by then. And there are a lot more big changes that I'll have to miss out, as I'd just like to cover 10 big ones today. I'm totally up for doing another 10 at some point though, so let's get it started and see what we have. First of all, from patch 2.1, which was May 22nd, 2007, aka the Black Temple patch, was when druids got Swift Flight Form. Up to this point they only had the regular one, which could be trained at level 68 by their class trainers, similar to how paladins or warlocks get trained for their mount at level 40 currently in Classic. However, this was only 60% flight speed, like what most other people would have had. The Swift version ups that to a massive 280% flight speed, and I actually thought you could still herb in flight form. It turns out this was actually patched out in 2.1.2. Still, it's instant cast, unlike every single other flying mount, so it's this...
Yeah, for herbing, this is gonna be really OP. Druids are gonna be really OP. I think also for mining and all this type of stuff, basically you can be just really swiftly just moving around and yeah, mining, herbing. Druid, very viable spec. Feral tank, one of the best tanks in TBC, and a restoration druid, very viable in PvP.
Significant advantage for druids out in the open world, farming, herbing or mining. Unfortunately, you can't just go and train swift flying like you could with the previous form. You need to have bought artisan riding, which is 5,000 gold, so that's going to be a whack in your wallet. But after that you can start the quest that works towards unlocking this form. It's a pretty massive quest actually, so I'm not going to go over it all here, but it has additional benefits tied to it as well. It gives you about 1800 rep with the Cenarian Expedition, which pretty much every druid will want to get exalted with.
You need to be getting Cenarian Expedition on Exalted because they provide a really good tanking two-handed mace, which is really good. So if you want to be feral tank and you want to be tanking 5-man dungeons, you gotta get Cenarian Expedition or on Exalted. That should be actually your main goal from the beginning.
Regardless for its great rewards, as well as 2 idols, one for flight forms and the other functional in some way for all the druid specializations. And finally it gives you access to summon Anzu in Sethic Halls as part of this quest line. This heroic only boss is where the Raven Lord mount is dropped, which has always been highly sought after. However, only a druid who has progressed this quest can summon him via an essence infused moonstone.
Also, only druid can actually summon Anzu. God damn, I didn't even know about it.
Reusable keyring item. This restriction was not dropped until Cataclysm, so if you're planning on trying to farm the Raven Lord, you better have a druid friend. Second of all, on patch 2.2, PvP CC hard duration caps. You know the first time you got hit by a polymorph in Classic and it said like it had 20 seconds left or something, and then it actually lasted 20 seconds, and then the mage just sheeps you again and again and again, and you end up not being able to play the game for an entire minute. Thankfully, this didn't last throughout the entire duration of TBC. Well, until patch 2.2, at least on the 27th of September 2007, was when this was changed. All those CC effects that can last seemingly forever and ever were capped to 10 seconds maximum.
Yeah. Finally, I think this was just such needed change, and yeah, they did it. It's just a bit ridiculous because mage is obviously so overpowered in Classic, and then you're giving him like 20-second, you know, like CC. It's just too much.
Duration in PvP. This included spells like Polymorph, Fear, Scare Beast, Freezing Trap, Mind Control, Zap, Hibernate. Basically, if it made you lose all control of your character and could last stages, it was changed, and the cap used to be 12 seconds in an earlier patch in TBC as well, but that clearly wasn't enough, especially when you take into account that spell haste and heroism or bloodlust is a thing in arenas. You can only imagine how annoying it would have been getting put into a 20+ second fear following a less than 1 second cast time, and this
Yeah, they needed to do this because they basically introduced arenas, so it wouldn't be really fair.
was on top of some of those spells getting extra ranks to make them last even longer. This did make Arena more competitive too by reducing those caps, since there was less reliance on being able to fall back on endless resets, and you really needed to start to work towards more CC chains in order to win. Number 3, moving on to patch 2.3 now, the Gods of the Zul'Aman patch, released on November 13th, 2007. This patch was huge actually.
Yesterday was my first time that I actually went to Zul'Aman raid. For those who are not playing TBC, it's basically you're going Karazhan, then you're going to Gruul Sword Lair and Magtoridon. Those are like your tier 4 dungeons, raids, and then the next step is actually Zul'Aman, the Eye, and CCC, where Lady Vash is, and after that you are going to Mount Hyjal, Black Temple, and Sunwell Plateau. Those are tier 6. So Zul'Aman is actually kind of like mid-tier dungeon. Very, very fun. I had a lot of fun over there, and it was actually kind of challenging, to be honest.
I'm going to cover a bunch of new changes that this brought into the game because I think it made some really cool additions. The class that without a doubt got the biggest set of straight up buffs perhaps ever so far in the history of WoW was the Paladin, specifically Retribution Paladins, though all 3 specializations got some love for sure. Mana costs down across the board, cooldowns reduced, talent reworks to give spell hit, seals could no longer be dispelled if they're talented in the retry. I mean, just see for yourself with the whole list of changes here. There were a few little nerfs in there too, but they were more along the lines of bug fixes. Overall, there's many reasons to be happy.
Spiritual Attunement. This ability will now gain mana properly from Vampiric Embrace heals. Yep.
As a Paladin here. Number 4, I'm going to combine 2 things together here because they're sort of mechanics that work this way in Classic, but were actively patched out in TBC, despite the core reasons why these interactions happened still existing. First of all, Elemental Mastery no longer guarantees 2 crits anymore come patch 2.3. This happened because of the spell batching window, I imagine, now as it did back then. So any faint enjoyment of this artificial lag is completely thrown away in TBC really. Secondly, players no longer gain the moving AoE radius bonus if they are jumping. At the moment in Classic, when you jump, your AoE spells get a bit of extra range to account for where you will have the potential to land. It's like a switch you can turn on and off to extend the range of your AoE spells. You'll see all good players take advantage of this all the time. Just check any mage stream to see what I mean for Classic. Okay. Number 5, another one from 2.3. Weapon skill is now gone and has been replaced with expertise. This was kind of a nerf and a buff depending on what race you are. In Classic, many players rolled human or orc to get the extra weapon skill because, put simply, the higher your weapon skill is, the less damage penalty you have from whenever you get a glancing blow against a high level enemy. And when you go over the base weapon skill cap, this bonus continually applies, though it does have its limits. This is why I love.
That's why I think in Classic the best tank that you can actually be is just warrior tank human, because you're gonna be having more threat generated than, for example, compared to orc. Even though orc has X specialization, the best weapon in the game is obviously a sword, 2 swords. So human, the best human, the warrior tank.
Level 44 pair of mail gloves are one of the most expensive and the best items for Fury warriors throughout the entire duration of Classic. Once you equip these, you basically aren't taking them off until TBC, though by TBC weapon skill was not a big of a deal anyway, since the chance for a glancing blow to occur against a boss level mob was reduced from 40 down to 25%, and the weapon skill stat now just increased the crit chance instead of its previous functions. And by the way, weapon skill was still a thing in that you had to level your weapons up, but it had less contribution to your damage overall. Enter expertise then. This was simply 1 point of expertise reduces the chance for your attacks to be dodged or parried by 0.25%. It was a new cap to consider and is far more accessible on items than weapon skill ever was. Also, races like Dwarf and Troll, who previously had weapon skill on guns and bows respectively, now get 1% crit instead, which is just a straight up buff because ranged weapons could never glance, so it was kind of completely pointless as a passive. Number 6, another one from patch 2.3 now, and I have to say I really like this one. So you know how in Classic there are specific healing and then specific spell damage gear? Well, come patch 2.3, any item that just had raw healing also had about 1/3 of that amount added as spell damage.
I think this was very good, very good change. And in Warlock, it's gonna be basically just spell power. There's not gonna be increased healing done by and damage done by, but in Warlock, Wrath of the Lich King is gonna be just increased spell power. So imagine that you are, for example, elemental shaman who got a lot of damage gear. You can very easily just switch like this to your dual spec to restoration, and you can be actually healing, and you can be kind of viable. But the difference is going to be that you're not going to be having so much mana regeneration, you're not going to be having so much MP5, so you're not going to be as good as a restoration druid with restoration gear, but actually restoration shaman with elemental gear can be very viable.
This gave healers a much better chance to defend themselves in PvP, farm in the open world, DPS on bosses when they didn't need to heal, and just, well, be a bit more useful in general. There was still raw damage items and items that only did have one specific type of damage of them, like green items of Shadow Wrath for example, but this was a really nice change for healers that may just be in from day one. Some items did still have just healing, like the ZG enchants are mentioned specifically, but items that worked in this way were few and far between. Number 7, another from patch 2.3. This patch was absolutely huge, and this one was a big change to give some more convenience to the player. 2.3 was when the Ritual of Refreshment was brought into the game. It did require you to already know Conjure Water rank 9 and Conjure Food rank 8, which were the highest ranks available and were obtainable from skill books throughout dungeons, and the ritual itself functioned exactly like how Warlock Summoning does at the moment, needing 2 other players to complete the ritual. Each table would last for 3 minutes or until 50 use.
This was a very good idea, and finally you don't have to ask for food. Mage is just gonna summon the table and you can be just getting food like that.
So you can imagine how quickly these are going to be burned through by all of your casters, or especially healers in your groups. Still, it meant that instead of logging in for 15 minutes before raid to press Conjure Water, you could now just bring along some materials, pop down the table, and you're good to go. Number 8, this one is from patch 2.3.2, a smaller patch for sure, but it had one big class change in it that really can't be overstated how impactful it was, and this was a big shake up to mages' talents. First of all, Ice Block was made baseline for all mages, which could be trained as early as level 30. Cold Snap was moved to where Ice Block was previously in the mage tree.
Oh yeah, hypothermia. So in Classic, if you're gonna be just casting Ice Block, then you can like Cold Snap, and immediately you can cast another Ice Block. But in TBC, you're gonna be just having hypothermia, and you're not gonna be actually able to do it. You will have like 30-second window when you cannot just cast any Ice Block.
And its cooldown was lowered to 8 minutes, and this could be reduced to 6.5 minutes through talents now. On top of this, Cold Snap was replaced with Icy Veins, which the first iteration of it decreased casting time of all spells by 20% and increased the chance that chilling effects now freeze the target by 10%. This was further changed in 2.4. Instead of increasing the chance to freeze, it now prevented damage pushback on all spells for its duration. And don't forget, you also had your Water Elemental, of course, by this point too, as your 41 point talent. Frost mages in PvP were like an entire armory of cooldowns that you needed to go through, and by the final patch for TBC,
Frost mage from TBC in arenas it's just a machine, but the problem is that it has actually kind of high skill ceiling, so you need to know what you're actually doing. But mages were very strong in TBC arenas and very powerful in Wrath of the Lich King arenas, but you gotta be good. You gotta know what you're doing. It's just as simple as, for example, Warrior Charge, Blade Storm, and everybody's that, you know, it is what it is.
they were quite a different beast than they were early on for sure. Number 9, a change from patch 2.4 now, this time for the Warlock. Somewhat similar to Ritual of Refreshment, it was a big change to Ritual of Summoning to make it so much more useful. You know, when you're inside an instance or a raid halfway through, someone disconnects, they have to go, someone else joins and you want to summon them in, and you have to run all the way outside to get them summoned because for whatever reason you all need to be in the same instance for summons to work. This was finally done away with in patch 2.4, making getting new people into groups so much easier, especially when people may have forgotten
Oh, so ritual summoning can be finally used in raids. Very, very useful.
items from the bank or need to go and repair. It was a really welcome change in my opinion. Oh, and you're probably wondering, yes, Soulwell is in TBC, but it does only have 10 charges though. And funnily enough, before patch 2.3, it took 5 minutes for the spell to complete. Why, Blizzard? Just why? Anyway, we have that to look forwards to too, I guess. Number 10, and our final point for the day, or 2 points, I should say really. These were 2 class changes from patch 2.4.3, the very final patch from TBC. First of all, Curse of Shadow was removed from the game, and its bonuses were combined into Curse of Elements, which meant that one Warlock could fully cover the curse slots, and only one needed to be Deep Affliction spec to get that bonus 3% damage talent, Malediction. Okay. Secondly, Cheat Death from Sub-Rogues got some pretty big changes, and well, when I say changes, I mean nerfs. This talent had been one of the key things that made rogues so incredibly obnoxious in PvP. Between this, Evasion, Cloak of Shadows, Shadow Step, and a massive toolkit of CC and mobility, they were an absolute nightmare to deal with. And you can see in patch 2.3 to 2.4.3 the changes in action here. The 2.3 version made rogues near unkillable once per minute. The new version made it weaker. It was still strong, don't get me wrong, but nowhere near on the same level as it was in 2.3. Also, the damage reduction factoring resilience more or less made it a straight nerf due to the sheer volume needed to hit the cap. Hemorrhage damage was also reduced by 5% on the same patch as well, by the way. We'll have to wait and see how this affects great rogues in the long term, because Cheat Death won't be exactly as good as you remember it being.
Rogue, still gonna be very viable, but unfortunately more viable in PvP, not so much viable in PvE, because obviously there are other specs. It just comes to the utility that the rogue can bring, and unfortunately it's not that much. Fellas, please go in the description, subscribe to Willy. You can find the original video in the description, and also please leave a like, comment, subscribe to my channel. It helps me a lot. It helps the algorithm. Please subscribe to me right now. See ya.